Tenang telah membawa resah, resah telah membawa kau kemari. Tapi kamarmu bukan di sini dan kau merantau lagi. The calm has brought the storm. The storm has brought you here, but your room is not here, and you wonder once again. Welcome to Nusantara, where I bring you voices in art and living heritage that define and disrupt ideas about the Nusantara, the world's largest archipelago. My guest speaker today is Thiagarajan Kanaga Sabapathy, Adjunct Associate Professor at NUS Department of Architecture and widely known as Singapore's preeminent art historian and scholar. Fondly known as TK, he's a tireless educator, critic, and advocate of the arts and culture. I will be discussing with TK his remarkable contributions that capture and critique the development of art in Singapore, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia in over 40 years, and the ancient temples of Borobudur and Prambanan that make the Nusantara an important center for the study of Hinduism and Buddhism. Welcome to the show, TK. It's such an honor to have you on my show discussing your tireless, timely, and timeless contributions to the beating heart of what matters in the space of art, that is free and critical thinking, in challenging subaltern points of views, hegemonic models, as well as amplifying suppressed voices through the writing of art in the region. You know, our paths have crossed several pivotal points in my career. And as a teacher to many of us, I think you've seen and guided me through my many reincarnations. So it's a great privilege to talk about picturing and desiring the Nusantara with you. So TK, how about we start by inviting you to introduce yourself and your work to our audience?
Thank you, No. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you. I think you have introduced me enough already, and it's on a very high plane. Thank you for your kind words. I might say the following in relation to what we wish to discuss. My field of research, writing, speaking, teaching is the history of art. And for as long as I have been active in that field, it has been the art in and of the region we call Southeast Asia.
You once said that the first writers to mobilize the term art to account for the body of artifactual material in the region were archaeologists rather than art historians, whereby the earliest art and histories of the region are actually cast in Hindu-Buddhist cosmological symbolic frames. Can you describe to us two key early examples of important ancient Hindu-Buddhist art from the Nusantara?
From the Nusantara, well, I'm going to name candidates that are obvious and which are almost unavoidable. Not that I want to avoid them or implying that you wish to avoid them. And they are Borobudur and Prambanan.
Yes.
Both in Java. A brief comment on the earlier remark that you made about the earliest writers on things which we recognize as art, archaeologists, and I might add epigraphers, that is to say those who read inscriptions, deciphered inscriptions. I think historically this is largely true because history of art of Southeast Asia, of these kinds of representations was relatively undeveloped. Yes, there was a history of art of India, and often the early proper art histories conventionally were written by those who, from purely an Indian perspective, and it was seen as an extension of India to extents that it was, Southeast Asia was regarded as greater India. Okay. And there are precedents for this as well. And individuals who were trained in art history came on subsequently. But this is not to denigrate or lower the importance of these earlier writers. Indeed, I would make the comment that histories of art and historians of art are developed by writers and scholarship from diverse disciplines and diverse sources besides art history. And what the art historian or who is disposed towards art history is to utilize these diverse sources and direct them to yield to the disciplinary demands of art history. I'm not saying anything that is brilliantly new. This happens all the time.
Right.
And hence the claim that art history is interdisciplinary. I mean, it can only qualify nominally to be interdisciplinary if it is conscionably aware of methods derived from other disciplines which are congenial to, which are useful to the explication of things looked at as art. And in looking at Borobudur and Prambanan, the earliest accounts of them were archaeologists and restorers who reconstituted them, rebuilt them, reconstructed them, because they were in long periods of disuse,
Right.
and therefore virtually unrecognizable as built entities. And this required enormous resources and thinking as to how one might reconstitute it in ways that might come close to how it might have been. And till today, these are still moments of speculative thinking. Okay. Borobudur, can we move on to...
Yes, let's start by discussing Borobudur, built by the Selendras. When was it built and where?
Yeah.
I think I have a picture of me at Borobudur.
Well done. It's situated in the Kedu Plain, Central Java. When was it built and by whom? That's difficult because, like Prambanan too, there has not been a founding inscription,
Right.
a founding stone, so to speak, slab, to declare its dedication and its patron, which you do get in many of the Khmer monuments, and that is a terrific kudos for the historical reconstruction of chronologies and histories.
Yep.
And this is where, through archaeological rethinking and constructive thinking and art historical constructive thinking, the understanding now is that Borobudur was built over a period of time between the end of the 8th and the beginning of the 9th century. Okay, what do we have there now? Yes.
So it's actually a Buddhist monument.
Yes, it is Buddhist, unmistakably. And it's, as a constructed entity, as a built entity, it's probably the largest one that has ever been built singly, not in relation to a larger complex, which has other buildings. Although the domain of Borobudur had probably many ancillary and auxiliary buildings that were built and utilized for its ritual use, none of which survive now. But what survives is the core monument. And it consists of a design form which is particular to Java and Southeast Asia, although not exclusively so. A terraced arrangement.
Yes.
The terraces are square in delineation and culminated with 3 terraces that are circular. And then supported with a basement foundation, which is so visible in your image. And these terrace platforms are to be ambulated, to be traversed, to be walked through. So it's a building which is very peculiar. It's a building not in the conventional sense of a sheltered entity. It is not sheltered, but it is a building which has an extended and extensive interior. You can walk into and through it.
Yes.
And when you reach the summit, then you have really walked the entire distance that the building is standing for. It's devoted to various aspects of the practice of Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings. And a remarkable feature of Borobudur and Prambanan is the vitality of the relationship between architecture and sculpture, which we use as very distinctive terms today. Sometimes you could feel in being in the monument that the sculpture completely defines and overwhelms what can be recognized as architecture.
And I recall that the sculptures, they're almost as a story, a narrative. It forms a narrative as you...
Yes. There are 2 types of sculpture there. One category may be referred to as relief sculpture, and the other may be referred to as sculpture in the round. That is to say, images that are carved completely, which if you wish to, you could have a complete 360 view around it. But of course, once they are installed for the purposes here, you only have a predominantly frontal view of the 3-dimensional images. So yes, the relief sculptures, the most prominent are framed in panels, and each panel presents an event or a scene. These have been identified, and the identification has been made possible by referring to texts. So the relationship between text and image is extremely important, not only with this, but all kinds of historical, traditional built forms and sculpted images. Often what they are, their identity, identifying. The process begins by consulting written texts. Although the texts have been identified, we are not completely sure, how shall I put it this way, whether these texts were in existence in Java at that time, or what version or what recension of these texts existed in Java at the time. But I don't think the identification is in doubt, because they conform to the main representations there. So it begins with the world of the mundane, the world of karma, of cause and effect, of good deeds and bad deeds, heavens and hells, and so on and so forth. And then as you begin to ascend, the form of existences that you encounter are elevated. one of the most compelling series that are represented there is devoted to the life of the historic Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, from the moment of his decision to appear as in his human form on earth to the time of his parinirvana, to the time that he dies. But I think what they stop there is the moment of his enlightenment.
Yes.
And then in the uppermost terraces are devoted to higher forms of enlightenment and higher forms of the practice and the realization of the Dharma through various Buddhas of the present and the Buddhas of the future. Once we leave the square terraces and emerge into circular terraces, the circular terraces consist of 3 diminishing terraces, and on them are miniature stupas, smaller stupas, which are hollow, and yet within each stupa is an image of the Buddha seated. The casing of these stupas are perforated.
Yes.
That means to say they're opened up, and you can just have a view, a glimpse of the partial image of the Buddha, not all of it. And then the culmination is a stupa itself. I guess by the time you reach the third, you are in the presence of the Buddha, but you do not need visual reminders of the Buddha at all. The visual domain, the visual realm, which has preoccupied the lower ambulation, is over if you have done it in the proper way and achieved what is intended to be achieved at that. So that is the sequence of and it's, in every way you look at it, extremely coherent, unified, and well arranged and orchestrated. And in that sense, I think Borobudur is outstanding in the Buddhist world. And I dare say, although we do not have any written records of how it was used and who used it and how it was featured in the Buddhist world, yes, we don't. But I cannot imagine sort of an institution such as this, unknown in the then Buddhist world.
Indeed.
It must have been a very desired and desirable center for pilgrimage.
Indeed.
And we can adduce that because there are other sources which tell us that Southeast Asia, which we call Southeast Asia, certain parts of Southeast Asia, were extremely important locations for the learning of Buddhism, the study of Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism. And there were preeminent teachers of the Dharma located in Southeast Asia, which drew disciples here. So
it was it's like a mecca, like for pilgrims everywhere to congregate.
Yeah. And we do have occasional testimonies of that kind of dynamism in Southeast Asia. So it's with that in mind that I'm speculatively suggesting that it is unlikely that this was just unknown at the time.
I mean, after all, it is one of the largest known Buddhist monuments of the ancient world. Yes.
Pretty much so.
Yeah.
Pretty much so. Yes.
And you also mentioned Prambanan Temple, but this is actually Hindu compared to Buddhist Borobudur. Please tell us, what is Prambanan and where it's located?
Yeah, well, it's in the village of Prambanan. The name to the temple complex is derived from the name of the village, which is Prambanan. Again, on the border of central and East Java.
And it's also, I think, an hour's drive away from Borobudur.
Yes. The proximity is quite remarkably close by. And its date, again, there has not been located a founding statement for it, founding stone. But there is an inscription which is presently in the Jakarta Museum, dated to 856 of the Common Era, which is a kind of a royal decree from a reigning king at the time, in which there is mention of a temple complex which we interpreters have said possibly refers to Prambanan. It says the house of Shiva. That's what it says in the text, and that's what Prambanan is. And how. So the present thinking is that could be affixed to Prambanan 856. So roughly the mid-9th century, which is not too far chronologically removed from the moment of the completion of Borobudur. It's Hindu, you're right in saying that, and it's a vast, dense complex of enclosures, an enclosure within an enclosure within an enclosure, walled enclosures. And in the very center, in the very middle, which constitutes the heart of the whole, are 3 tower shrines. Each one raised on multiply arranged platforms and symmetrically arranged, but not symmetrically proportioned. The central shrine is the largest and the tallest and the most copious, accompanied by 2 smaller shrines. And in that central shrine is dedicated to Shiva. And in there is an image of Shiva, the dominant image of Shiva. And on the flanking shrines are images of Brahma and Vishnu. This is remarkable. I think it's remarkable anywhere in the Hindu world, so to speak. And Southeast Asia with Prambanan constitutes an important as part of that world making of the Hindu-Buddhist sort of realm. It's not peripheral at all. It is vital. And rarely do we have the full explication of the 3 principal deities in Hinduism all in one, as clearly, visibly, and prominently as we do in Prambanan. And in the Shiva shrine, there are 3 other images attached, abutting one another, consisting of Agastya, who is seen or regarded in Java anyway, esteemed as the bearer of the Vedas and important texts to Java, as a kind of a seer, guru, and dispenser of learning. One devoted to Durga,
Yes.
who I know you are very partial to. I mean Durga. And the 4th is to Ganesha. So all these, Agastya, Durga and Ganesha are all, if one were to use a family kinship system, related to Shiva. Right. They're all connected with Shiva, and they partake of the force and the energy of Shiva and manifest Shiva in different forms out there. So there is Shiva, and radiating outwards in all directions, cardinal directions, are these manifestations, each one of them having a distinct image and a distinct appearance. Wow. Yes.
That's the first time I've ever heard about the role of Shiva and his many manifestations. Well, speaking of Durga, when I was in Prambanan, I recall seeing an impressive sculpture of the goddess Durga from the Hindu pantheon. And she's known as a divine protector and symbol of feminine power. And interestingly, according to the locals, this is a stone statue of Lara Zhongrang, a Javanese princess cursed into stone by a prince whom she refused to marry. So what does the infusion of the local with the Indic references say about the art from Prambanan?
This is fascinating and interesting, and I think it's extremely important what you observed. No, there you are.
Yeah.
You look one with Durga.
Thank you.
Firstly, the image that you refer to is a full exposition of Durga Mahisasura Mardini. Let me explain that a little
Yes,
bit.
please. Break it down for us.
Yeah. Mahisasura is the kind of, to use a common terminology, the king of the demons. You know, the whole thing about devas and asuras, the world of gods who are benign, and then the world which is populated by non-benign entities who are also divine. Mark you, they are also divine, but they are the other, so to speak. The forces of, if you like, darkness and the forces of light. And the two are needed. One needs the other for the system to work. The system of the universe as we have conceived of it, and which we continue to conceive of it. This idea of light and dark, good and evil, continues to pervade our thinking of who we are, what we are, of the universe and cosmologies and so on, however we want to put it. The world of science fiction is replete with this. Continue. Okay. So there is Mahisasura, who is creating havoc in the world and the universe, and he has to be counted. And it's interesting, it's a he, it's a male. And the gods on the other side, the benign, condense all of them and create this supreme entity who is female. Now, mark you, who is Durga. And she, of course, vanquishes Mahisasura. It's a long-drawn battle, and that forms part of the narrative that constitutes the epic. And in the sculpture of Durga Mahisasura, usually you'll see her either astride on the back of an animal form that looks like a buffalo. And Mahisasura assumes that form amongst other. He's shape-changing all the time. He has this remarkable ability to be one kind of thing at one time and another kind of thing on another. So it is as a demon king in the buffalo form that he is encountered and vanquished, and she beheads him and stands triumphantly on the back of the buffalo. But that's not the end of Mahishasura. He then changes shape and appears as something else, as an asura, as a demonic figure, and then she just clamps her hand on his head and says, "Down, boy, down," and he's down. Boy, I'm not a good storyteller, am I? And so on. So here, if you at the bottom part of it, you will see the buffalo. And next to the buffalo, on her left, you will see a human-like figure emerging. That is his subsequent manifestation. And there are others as well. But she's multi-armed. I think in this she's 8-armed. There are 4 arms on each side, each arm holding an attribute, an object. The object that she carries are often warlike objects, things that she uses as weapons.
Yes.
So it makes very clear that she is a warrior. She's a combatant. And this is not messing around, man.
Yes.
I mean, he has to be dealt with, you know. And I'm here to defeat this. So there she is. And yet, no, when you look at it, she assumes a courtly demeanor. She is queenly, if you like.
She's bejeweled. She's crowned.
She's crowned, bejeweled, and a slight gentle sway to her body. This is not someone in the throes of a battle. The battle is over. It's over, and she regains her composure, regains her benignness, you know. So she's no longer Durga, the feared one, but she's Durga, the settled, consolidated image. And that's the image that she's shown. There are other representations of Durga elsewhere, even in which she's shown in the throes of the battle, in which she grimaces and she is full of sort of active positions and postures. There are also representations of Durga which I would call as abbreviated symbolic forms, where she's standing there, there's a female figure standing just on the horns of a buffalo, just so the buffalo as such, as an emblem, emblematically, is just signified just by a section of its head, the horn. That means everything is settled. She is the supreme deity, now not to be beheld as the wondrous, combatant and victorious, but for devotion.
Right.
For the purposes of devotional communion between the devotee and the image. I think she is somewhere in between in my reading of the image.
Right.
And that would cohere with the other three images that are there, because Shiva too is there for devotion, as Agastya, as is Ganesha. They're all relatively in meditative postures and positions, in full control of themselves, almost static in that sense, still and static.
Wow.
Yes. So that's your narrative, but this is no longer the narrative. The narrative is distilled into what is referred to in art historical terms an iconic form. Right. This is the icon, and an icon is an image becomes an icon, in my view, when it distills and summarizes complex
ideas,
phenomena and ideas into a single, comprehensible for the human. And our comprehension is not all that great when faced with these kinds of complex entities, so they have to be made accommodating for us. So this is the accommodated, settled position for humans as devotees looking at it. Otherwise, it will be too elusive and too complicated.
But that's the power of art, isn't it?
Yes.
And the art maker.
Yes, indeed. You could say that. You could extol and why we value it, and why it should continue to be valued, because it speaks about us, to us, and yet it takes us into, without wanting to be too mystifying about it, to domains that are bigger and larger than us, because of our willing and our desire to be that way, to also be beyond where we are. This is not something that is imposed on us. This is something that we desire and yearn for.
Towards a mystical reality.
Well, Priyadasa will be thrilled that you conform to his view of the mystical. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, TK, on that very detailed explanation. And I just want to go into what John Guy said, and he, in his book, Lost Kingdoms, Hindu-Buddhist Sculpture of Early Southeast Asia, for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And he argues that the ongoing vitality of local traditions ensured that a strong local identity prevailed, even when these Indic forms and rituals are imported. So keeping in mind what John said and our discussion on the art forms of Borobudur and Prambanan, what does the early art, especially the Nusantara, say about regional credence in art making?
A vital and searching question. I'll try and make sense of what I know and convey my thoughts on it. It's It's a matter that has preoccupied those who have studied and talked about Nusantara and the larger sphere of Southeast Asia. Presently, when looking at the modern and the contemporary, as well as the pre-modern, both from the recent perspective, the smaller entity of the nation, as well as the interrelated connections of nations to form a region. And I think it's important to keep these two in mind. Yes, on the one hand, the connections with India were important, were significant, and had an impact, undoubtedly. Because if you look at the languages that were used at the time, Sanskrit, for example, the writing of Sanskrit in Southeast Asia, wherever they existed, the adaptation of Sanskrit leading to other languages. There's no doubt that those who wrote the language knew it very well. It was not a poorly written text. The texts were sophisticatedly written. And the references to the major religious texts, both Hindu and Buddhist, also indicate a thorough knowledge of various kinds of Hindu practices and various kinds of propagating the Buddhist Dharma, the Dharma of the Buddha. And even as these were written in the received languages from India, that is Sanskrit, simultaneously there was also written in Old Javanese, Old Malay, and Khmer. So dual, it was bilingual. Of course, what was said in the two languages was different, but there was more than one language that was employed. And in Indonesia, after I think a certain period, Sanskrit virtually completely disappeared and Old Malay and Old Javanese prevailed, which must mean that the writing of these texts could now be more than adequately represented by the languages here, by the scribes, by the writers here, by the speakers here. Similarly, with the things that were made, the things that were fabricated, built forms, sculpted forms, and all the things in between, while their sort of symbolic content, the symbolic motivation for these are recognizably affiliated with practices of Hinduism and practices of Buddhism. And they are recognizable because the makers of these forms, both architecture and sculpted forms, were able to transform what was written or what was told into visual form. And that's why we can recognize it as Durga, we can recognize it as Shiva, we can recognize it as Vishnu. Otherwise, it would not have been possible.
Right.
If you want to make an image that is Vishnu, you better know what Vishnu might look like as an image and make it. And yet, if you examine the details of the making, you see that they're not exactly imitations of things from India. You have to observe sufficient attributes and appearances to qualify to be that kind, identifiable as that image. You have to fulfill that. Once you have fulfilled that, then other things can take on a different personalization, a different kind of representation. The complexes that we look at, Borobudur, Prambanan, Angkor Wat, the Bayon, I'm just naming the ones that I'm most familiar with and I often talk about, are irreplaceable. There are no prototypes of that in India. And when they were built, Angkor Wat, when it was built, it was the largest stone structure anywhere in the world. I mean, the immense resources, both conceptual, imaginative, and economic that was needed to put that together must have been phenomenal. As it was said about the cathedrals in Europe, when the cathedral sort of age began to appear, because they were the largest stone structures that were assembled, and the quarrying of that kind of stone, the engineering that went in there, was all devoted to that. Likewise here, that must mean that the patronage that enabled this, there must have been a synchronization between the, if I can use the word, the priesthood and the aristocracy, because we assume that it is the aristocracy that provided the resources, or those close to the aristocrat. So the priesthood has access to the court, and the court had liaisons with the priesthood. It is from this connection that the particularity of the design, particularity of the making emerged, I think. And I think what we need to do to specify this a little bit more, I'm talking in very general impressionistic terms, is to examine these relationships meticulously, closely, and analytically, in as much as available material now enables us, or we have to reread available materials in ways that will provide clues as to how these relationships might have worked out to produce Prambanan and Borobudur and Angkor Wat and the Bayon and so on. We have some inclinations from the inscriptions, but not enough. And perhaps we have to A, reread the inscriptions, and B, read writings or documents from a wider field to then coerce and persuade these fields to come and illuminate the specific issues that we want to.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I concur with John Guy. And from my knowledge of these things, it's similarly with the modern too. How do we read the artifacts? How do we read the commentary? And the modern reader, Southeast Asia, consists of writings not only by art historians, but a whole phalanx of people. But how do these varieties of writings, varieties of texts, whom does it suit? Whom does it fit? Whom does it benefit? Are matters that depends on the excavators of these readers, those who take things out of there for their desires and purposes. So I think that's where we are in the question of regionness. And I think you have one more question. Why region and regionness anyway? Yes, please.
Yes, talking about region and regionness, I just want to go into definitions. I mean, we are discussing Nusantara on this show, and it's an ancient term that has evolved to describe this vast island chain that includes Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, southern parts of Thailand, all the way to the Philippines and East Timor. But there is an awareness there are much older definitions of the region, such as Suvarna Bhumi, which has connections to Sanskrit, and the definition of Nusantara from the Majapahits. Could you tell us how these definitions came about?
Well, I would say immediately they came about by those, let's say, Suvarna Bhumi and Southeast Asia, especially not ASEAN. This is the latest manifestation of the region. Of those looking at this region from outside. which must mean, no, that there has been continued and somewhat sustained interest in this part of the world. And these terms are used by those who are claiming some kind of access, knowledge, connection with, desire for the region. The Nanyang, for example, is also used. Ptolemy, a kind of Greek cosmographer residing in Egypt, referred to this part of the world in one instance as the Golden Chersonese, which is the Golden Peninsula, meaning parts of Thailand and the Malay Peninsula. And in another, he referred to as, it's interesting, this part of the world as India beyond the Ganges. India beyond the Ganges. So here is a clue already. The sort of sparking point. It is India that marks what the other is. The other is unnameable, which doesn't have a name on its own. It has a name on account of its connection with, its orientation, its distance or proximity to something else.
Right.
So the Nanyang is the same too. Southern Seas, south of what? Southeast Asia is a directional notion. Southeast Asia of where? And so on, yeah. Nusantara, so we ask ourselves, and I think earlier I asked, we talked with Imran, do the communities and people within the region have, do they have
And do they see themselves as a region?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to say yes, but perhaps not in the comprehensive geographical compass that you are talking about when we say the whole of Southeast Asia as a kind of a blob on the map, you know. But within that, it's much more dynamically and much more existentially that is relevant to them. I think the communities see themselves in relation to or as different from the other continually.
Right.
And these are expressed in different ways. So I think the naming is one matter, and I think it's an important thing. We should examine these names, the etymology, and go into the etymology of the name Nusantara. It's interesting, to keep in mind that Indonesia is relocating its capital from Jakarta to Borneo and
Naming it
as Nusantara. Where does that sit within Indonesia, and how does that sit with
maritime Southeast Asia?
With the historiography
Yes.
of Southeast Asia? And the claiming of these kinds of region, either in terms of porous relationships or in terms of territoriality, is also real. I mean, you talk about the Majapahit, and this was made known to me by Imran once, many years ago, when we were talking about it. The Gajah Mada, who was I think the most important minister in the newly constituted Majapahit court and kingdom, took an oath that he would not relinquish his position and lead a quiet life until under the Majapahit aegis, all of Java, including Sunda, parts of Sumatra, and I think he named Pahang. Presumably it refers to the Pahang that we know on the eastern border of the peninsula, are all territorially united. Now that is a territorial formation, yeah. And as far as I know, I I think the sources that I've read, the term Nusantara was not used at that time by Gajah Mada. I don't think so. I may be mistaken. You might like to check on that, the etymology of this term. So, how Southeast Asia is formed and who forms them, I think has been a continuing part of the history of this region. So, the region and the regionness is not anything that has been sprung on us at any one moment. It has had varied, the graph of its history has been varied. And it would be interesting there may be somebody who has plotted this already, I don't know, but I'd like to pay a bit more attention to it myself. So perhaps in a year's time we can continue this point in our conversation. But I think I'll rest it at that moment.
Yeah.
And of course, ASEAN, which was formed in 1967, was formed from within, as part of the whole, what is referred to as a Cold War polemic, and Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines and Indonesia. These were the five founding nations of amongst the newly independent late 20th century, second half of the 20th century independent, to come together. And that has grown to include all the nation states that we recognize as Southeast Asia today. Yeah. So I think it's a region that is making and unmaking itself continually. No more than other regions. I mean, Europe itself, in the way that we understand Europe, not in the past, but not as far back as Swarnabhumi and Ptolemy's Golden Chersonese, is also a post-Second World War construction. And that too is beset with pulls and pushes as to what constitutes Europe, how far geographically, land-wise does it, who's in and who's out, and how does one qualify as a member of it, and so on. Yeah. So these are thoroughly artificial. They are artifices in the sense that they are humanly created for human needs. Regions are not naturally formed. They may be claimed to be naturally formed, but after they are formed. And so when we talk about natural affiliations, it's our making of it, rather than something that pre-exists. I suggest we settle on Borobudur as the principal embodiment of the Buddhist world in Southeast Asia at that moment, and then we'll go on to the Hindu world subsequently. Before we talk a little on Borobudur, it might be useful to briefly respond to the remark that you included in the question, citing me, that the earliest scholarship on these kinds of structures and buildings were by archaeologists and philologists. I think this is largely true, and I don't think it's exceptional in the case of Southeast Asia. Archaeologists were among the earliest professionals who reconstituted, recovered, reconstructed, conserved, and put together again what remained of earlier structures. And hence they had among the first encounters with these remains. And they set about documenting them in addition to re-enlivening them. And in doing so, they not only submitted written reports on the material conditions of what remain, but also some perceptions on their historical dimensions. So what they had to provide was, I would say, valuable data and valuable perspectives for the construction subsequently of narratives, accounts, explications that are art historical. So art history rode on the backs of archaeologists. Philologists are those who specialize in the reading of writings, of texts. And these were seen as defining affiliations with constructing the histories of these kinds of structures, because they gave information regarding as to when, where, why, and who prompted the making of these. And often, like the archaeologists, the philologists also in their accounts, not only translated and interpreted text, but in doing so, widened the scope of reading of text to connect textual evidence with the visual. So they too straddled their area as well as the historical aspects of art. And like the archaeologists, art historians are incredibly dependent on what philologists have made available by way of text.
Okay. Yes, TK.
Go ahead.
And shall we go into what you have said about identifying Borobudur?
Yes. And all of these come to bear in how we understand and look at Borobudur now. There are no known records of the founding of Borobudur, who built it, when, the date. Neither is there any evidence to say what it was built for.
Okay.
And even the name. We do not know whether Borobudur was the name that by which it was originally known. All of these are post constructions, and
I think we have a photo of Borobudur, if we could,
yes, okay, that's
bring that up.
yes, that's fine. And the term Borobudur, leaving aside its etymology, probably can be understood as analogous to a mountain where one might accumulate merit. And the accumulation of merit is central to the Buddhist path, the Buddhist quest, enabling entry into the domains of the Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
And if we take this as a kind of working proposition, then we can see Borobudur unfolding, telling itself, revealing itself, or yielding to such revelations to us.
And I think we have some pictures of the wall reliefs from Borobudur, maybe just the close-ups.
Yeah, okay.
It's okay, TK, you can continue.
Yes.
We'll bring that
Let
up
me go
as
on.
you...
Yeah. It consists of, and we can just about discern it, a stepped pyramid. Stepped terraces, each terrace position one above the other, diminishing in scale and altering in shape as one ascends. And so this sense of ascending is extremely vital for the unfolding and the symbolic meaning of what it is. It consists of 9 levels. The lower 5 levels, closest to the ground, are square in shape. Above them are 3 circular terraces, and I think you have a
Yes,
picture
I
of
do.
that.
Of
If we can get that out.
the close-up of the...
Circular terrace. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. Yes. 3 circular terraces, and at the very top is a large stupa that is seen as crowning this entire arrangement. 4 flights of staircases positioned east, west, north, and south along the cardinal directions enable access to Borobudur. The levels are stepped back, creating walkways along all the levels. And I would say that all of Borobudur is made for walking. And this is quite remarkable. And there's one other matter I would like to emphasize, which may reflect my own partiality, and that Borobudur is also for seeing. So walking and seeing are cardinal attributes, I think, in connecting with Borobudur. And I cannot emphasize this sufficiently, although someone will say, well, that's a typical prejudice on the part of an art historian. But I'm quite willing to live with that kind of a remark. And as we walk along the pathways of the square terraces, we behold carved panels, carved with sculpted compositions.
We have some of this.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I'm not going to dwell on the intricacies of each of the panels. Broadly, let me say, at the lowest level, which is covered for structural reasons, are panels depicting scenes, actions of life on earth, good and virtuous living, and its merits, as well as immoral and unethical lives and their consequences. The next level represents the early life of the Buddha prior to his human manifestation. These are incidents and events upholding virtuous actions, decisions, and outcomes. Above this level, we see the life of the Buddha in the present age as Siddhartha, from his birth to the moment of him attaining enlightenment and the commencement of his teaching of the Dharma. Above this are panels vividly dramatizing the quest for Dharma by a young man named Sudana, who exemplifies a quest that is upheld and represented as an ideal for all aspirants. We then leave the square world, the world consisting of square terraces, and head for the circular realm. And here there is silence. From all the activity, the phenomenal events that we have seen, we move to a moment when visibility and the visual and seeing are no longer requisite. One becomes internally replete. There are no visible evidence of anything, although in the circular terraces there are smaller versions of stupas. And in each of the stupa there is a seated Buddha. But these are not conveniently and easily visually accessible. And that must be a reason for it. The Buddha is present, but he need no longer be seen, because the seeing is within you. And that is the moment of some kind of realization. I think this is a kind of a sequence that could make sense as to how the design was determined and how the design was articulated, enlivened, the purpose for the innumerable relief panels, and Buddha images all along the square terraces. And then quite a dramatic change in tempo and tone once we get to the circular terraces. Even as we are unable to say precisely how it was seen and revered at the time of the making, we do appreciate its unity, its coherence, from our knowledge of its symbolism and from the history of Buddhism. And in all these respects, in my opinion, and it's not just mine, Borobudur marks a moment of supreme attainment in the world of Buddhism and representing Buddhism architecturally and artistically. It is one of the seminal moments in Buddhist art and architecture anywhere, not just in Java, not just in Southeast Asia, but anywhere, which must also mean, although we have no evidence to back it up, that it was known at that time. It must have been known at that time.
Indeed. Because it would have taken a lot of resourcing, manpower to coordinate.
Spot on. I mean, a representation such as this requires enormous resources, material resources, as well as resources pertaining to the human intellect, human imagination, and a powerful sense of will, motivation of wanting to not only realize it, but to cite it where it is cited now. And that location is a claim that Buddhism matters in that part of the world.
What a powerful statement. And it's lived on for centuries.
Yes, it has. Yeah. Yes.
And from Borobudur, let's explore Prambanan Temple next. And this is actually a Hindu complex compared to Buddhist Borobudur. Please describe to us what Prambanan is and where is it?
It's not too far away from Borobudur. It's on the border between Yogyakarta and Central Java provinces. In the vicinity of Prambanan itself, the name comes from the location. It's dated to about the mid-9th century of the Common Era. And it's a vast temple complex displaying the Hindu world in all its complexities. And yet it is designed precisely and comprehensively. In all these respects, it remains unprecedented. What am I saying? I've provided a brief description of Borobudur. Let me attempt something similar here. It consists of a system of rectangular walled enclosures, expanding from a center, and the center consists of tower shrines. You are displaying the central shrine, which forms the nucleus of the entire complex. And there are two others on either side.
Yes, we have a image of that as well, to look at the complex in its entirety.
Yes, you have yes.
So earlier that photograph was of the central.
Yes. And on either side there are two, and this kind of triumvirate, the three tower shrines form the nuclear center of Prambanan, and each of these towers consist of images of the principal manifestations that mark the Hindu world. The central and most important tower shrines is dedicated to Shiva.
Which we saw earlier.
Yeah. And on either side are respectively one for Vishnu and one for Brahma. In my understanding of and study of the Hindu world, with respect to architecture and sculpture, I doubt if there is another such instance in which there is such a clear, precise, and forceful demonstration of the three presiding divinities in the Hindu world stated out there, and in terms of their relationship one to the other. We have mentioned the intricate coherence, unity, binding the design and purpose of Borobudur. The conceptual and design sophistication embodied in Prambanan are on par with Borobudur. Their respective layouts are of course different. And in these two alone, we can gauge the supreme attainment of architecture and sculpture in the Buddhist and Hindu worlds as such, and not only in Southeast Asia. So inasmuch as I have suggested that Borobudur in all probability was known in the Buddhist world, likewise I would also like to propose that a complex such as what we call Prambanan now must also have a renown. A renown that may well be a precedent for some constructions even in India at about that time in the ninth century. Let me press on with a few details.
Yeah.
In the central tower are four large sculptures in the round, and they are images of Shiva, who is the presiding deity, Agastya, who is regarded with great reverence in ancient Java as the bearer of sacred texts and of learning, Ganesha, and Durga. Each of them housed in a cellar abutting with that is to say, connected to the cellar in which is the image of Shiva. And all of them, Ganesha, Durga, and Agastya, are all affiliated or connected with Shiva. It's like the enlarged Shiva kinship system, family system, radiating out in the four cardinal directions, east, west, north, south, and towards the whole of the universe. And I think your interest, is in one of those images.
Indeed it is. So when I was in Prambanan, I recall seeing an impressive sculpture of the Hindu goddess Durga, and here she is right here, who is known as a divine protector and symbol of feminine power. And interestingly, according to the locals, this is a stone statue of Lara Jongrang, a Javanese princess cursed into stone by a prince whom she refused to marry. So, TK, what does the infusion of the Indic references with the locals say about art from Prambanan?
That's a absolutely important question to ask. Let me take a little time to answer it, because I think it is significant. Firstly, the story, the legend that you refer to of Loro Jongrang. I have here some notes on it, and if I may read them.
Please.
Loro Jongrang is translated as slender maiden. And this is a trope that keeps reappearing in so much of the storytelling in this part of the world. And this is how the story goes. A Javanese princess called Lara Jongrang the only daughter of Baka, king of Mendan Kamulan, was renowned for her beauty and had been sought in marriage by many princes. When a prince named Bandung Bandawasa asked for her hand, King Baka said that if the young man could defeat him in combat, he could have her. What a way. In the ensuing fight or duel, the king was slain. Lara Jongrang had no intention of marrying a man who had slain her father, which is quite understandable, but was afraid to reject the young prince outright. So she tells him, and this is the wager, unless you build 1,000 temples in a single night, you have no hope of marrying me. Words to that effect. This seemingly impossible task was very nearly accomplished by Bandung, who was assisted by his father and an army of night spirits. The princess panicked. She did not know what to do. Then in steps one of her attendants, and they always are there, wiser, more worldly than the principal character, who advised her to pound the rice block, pounding paddy, as if pounding rice, a task usually undertaken in daylight, but this is night. She did so during the night, and the sleeping roosters were awakened by the pounding, and assuming it was dawn, began to crow. On hearing this, the army of night spirits, deceived into believing it was near daylight, vanished because they fear sunlight. And so, once they vanished, building 1,000 temples was not completely accomplished. The prince was thwarted. And so the prince, on discovering that such a strategy was used against him, was enraged. He cast a curse on the princess, causing her to become stone. The story doesn't end there.
Okay.
But Shiva intervenes, and by the grace of Shiva who intervened, she became a deity, and hence this image. Hence the image in the northern niche of the main temple at Prambanan, representing Durga Mahishasuramardini, is and has been described as that of the beautiful princess, Lara Jongrang, the slender maiden of incomparable beauty. So, you are borne with me in retelling the story. Let's get back to your question then. What is the significance of bearing another name? There are two names now.
Indeed. It's kind of syncretism.
Yeah. Yes, you could say that. This is not exceptional at all. I will name another instance in a short while. So, Durga is also Lara Jongrang, which must mean that naming a deity is a way of claiming her or him. Claiming him or her in a way that is pertinent to, that is current, that is relevant, that is important, that has some sense and meaning to the community. And in doing so, a single image, in this sense we are talking about image, or a single entity can have multiple identities simultaneously. And any one of these identities does not preclude any other. So this plurality of sort of relevance, of manifestation, is a way in which any single entity continues to be enlivened and brought to currency and life at the time. So from an orthodox point of view, depending on where the center of orthodoxy is, if you're a Sanskritic scholar, for example, and a high priest in the Sanskritic sense, then it would be Durga. But if you are a member of the community in Prambanan in the 14th century, in the 13th century, it would be Larajangran. It doesn't mean that therefore Durga vanishes. No, Durga becomes Larajangran, assumes another identity. And no, let me move to
Yes, please.
a favorite image of mine, not just mine. I think the whole world celebrates this image. And who also has multiple identities. And sort of perhaps more popularly, easily known as Kendedis.
Right. I think we do have an image of, well, this is Prajna Paramita.
Let's stay with that. Let's stay with that.
And unlike Durga, she is a Buddhist deity.
Yes.
Durga is Hindu, but she's Buddhist.
That's right.
Okay.
Prajna Paramita is the embodiment of perfected knowledge in the Buddhist world. And this image is an exemplary representation of not only Prajna Paramita, but of any sculpted image in the world. It's from the Singasari period, 13th, 14th centuries of the Common Era. There, may I just point out, there she is seated on a doubly blooming lotus with the lotus leaves blooming upwards and downwards, seated cross-legged with her hands held in a teaching posture position, two-armed, and over her left shoulder, you see a blooming lotus. And on the lotus is an object that is identified as a book. And that is her book. That is the Prajna Paramita Sutra, in which the text proclaiming the completion of the perfected wisdom is written, of which she is the physical embodiment, and it is as a female entity that she is embodied. And here she is, for all intents and purposes, not only fulfilling the Buddhist iconographic world, but also eminently regal and eminently beautiful. When the Dutch colonial officers who requisitioned this image in order to conserve and then subsequently museologically possess it and take it over to Leiden, in which it lived for hundreds of years before it was repatriated to Indonesia. When they were recovering it, they were informed by the community in the vicinity that this was a portrait of someone called Kendedis. And since then, I think this doubling of the image, Prajna Paramita, Kendedis,
quite similar
Paramita, to what we talked about in Durga and Larajangran, has been upheld and is maintained. Kendedis was a 13th century and the first queen of Singasari, wife of Ken Arok, the founding ruler of Singasari. She, like Larajangran, was renowned for her exceptional, unrivaled beauty, her bearing and charisma, all of which embodied that sense of perfection. So all these attributes and virtues that are described of Kendedis could be replicated in the image of Prajna Paramita, and vice versa, from Prajna Paramita to Kendedis. And in this image, as in Loro Jangrang from Prambanan, is a representation with double, multiple identities, effective simultaneously. The appeal of and claim by many differently and currently. No, there's another
Yes, there is.
sort of incarnation, if I can use that term to this.
We have a work by
Yes.
Jim Sumpankan.
Yes. Kendedis has another life. In 1975, she appears in a new configuration imagined and executed by Jim Supangkat, making its debut in the very first exhibition of the new art movement Indonesia in that very year, i.e. 1975. This work, which you are projecting, reassembled and partially is not the original, reassembled and partially remade as a commission by the Singapore Art Museum in 1996 for its inauguration, is now a prized, esteemed work in the collection of the National Gallery, Singapore. So, if Prajna Paramita can be installed in the top tier of the Buddhist world, Jim Supankat's Kendedis could be installed in the top tier of the contemporary art world in Southeast Asia. And it is important, it is an important marker of the contemporary in art practices in the region of Southeast Asia. And significantly, a manifestation of the contemporary that embraces, intertwines with the past, not comfortably, but somewhat awkwardly and rather tensely. And that, no, is another story altogether if we move into various strands of the contemporary. And in that note, if I may be permitted, I would like to just, perhaps not so briefly, but talk a little bit about an artist of great favor in my reckoning.
Please, how does the past still reverberate in the present?
Yes.
To that
how does
extent?
the past reverberate in the present? And a candidate for that, preceding Dear Jim, is Latif Mohideen. I have some notes on that, and let me secure them. Yes. In the mid-1960s, Latif, I particularly want to refer to a series that he produced, an extensive series over more than 2 to 3 years, which has gained virtually a worldly fame now, called the Pago Pago Pictures. And that emerged from Latif's sojourning through the region of Southeast Asia, tracing a journey beginning from Indonesia via Singapore, the Malay Peninsula, Malaysia, which is his homeland, into Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. I don't think he moved towards Myanmar yet. And during this, he says, why did he undertake this? Let me cite a kind of a note that he made. Latif constantly writes notes to himself. And there are these notes everywhere, and they have been anthologized into a publication talking about his thinking, his aspirations, his dreams, nightmares about being an artist in Southeast Asia. And this is one that he notes on the journey. I quote, "Forms, colors, and spaces of the force of life in my homeland, in the Southeast Asian region, are no longer products of imagination or memory, as they had been when I recorded them in my paintings in Germany. He had been in Germany for 2 years in studying art in the academy. Now that he's returned, now I'm face to face with them and breathe them in straight from the source of the nature of Nusantara. There you go, no. He has both Southeast Asia as a region and Nusantara directly shaping the forms. And what are these forms that have stimulated his thought? The bamboo shoot, the rumbia palm, shellfish, and boat. These are the objects, things that he sees in the world of nature and in the world created by human beings, which indeed fuel and flame and enable him to form his pictorial world. So there's the claim for Southeast Asia as a homeland. And Southeast Asia also called in the very same breath as Nusantara. So the naming of a region, how is a region named? I think you probably want to say something about that later. Before we leave, Latif, Ala Kendedes, Prajnaparamita, and Durga and Lorojangrang. While in Cambodia, he visited the temples, the ancient temples, sketching them, drawing them, meditating on them. And in one instance, he had the following rumination in encountering a pile of stones that was on the verge of crumbling. And this is his meditations on it. Permit me to read this. So it is clear to me now, there are two basic forms of energy. One, the structuring energy behind the blocks of stone, forming them into tears like lotus buds. Two, the cracking energies of the nerve vessels, the patterns of thrusting banyan roots, the weaving together of his veins like a spread out net. One is man's composition, which seems to reach up to touch the sky, as did Prambanan, the towers in Prambanan and Borobudur. The other is God's creation, which longs to creep, to touch base, to penetrate into the earth in search of water. Sky, water. Two forms of energy that meet, embrace, clash, merge, that overlap, wrestle, intertwine, break away. Surrendering only to attack again, meeting and thrashing. Moments pass, days and months pass, seasons, years pass, centuries pass, but the energy of construction and the energy of destruction seem to go on fighting their tremendous battle here, right in front of my eyes. And all the sketches I have worked at all these years, what can I say, are a mere scratch or two of the force of movement and violent vibration of such events. I think it's one of the most moving testimonies that I have read on the present looking at the past and the past weighing on the present, and then the kind of self-appraisal, self-judgment. Where are we in all of this? Registering a mere scratch in all of this. But that scratching has to go on because we are human. And in pursuing those kinds of crutches, he has produced a suite of pictures called Borobudur. And there's a long poem on the Mekong, but I think we'll keep that for another time.
Okay.
That's Latif Muhyiddin. Yeah.
Well, thank you, TK, for outlining or sketching out Latif's perceptions, definitions of the region. And I thought this would be a good way to segue into our question, exploration on the definitions of the Nusantara. Because what we are discussing on the show is an ancient term that has evolved to describe the vast island chain that includes the region of Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, southern parts of Thailand, the Philippines, and East Timor. But, in this series, we're looking at maritime Southeast Asia more broadly, which conveys the region as having shared histories, languages, and traditions. So there are several definitions of the region. Perhaps you can help us take us through some of these. For example, one of the earliest one is Suvarna Bhumi. Yeah.
Yes. I'll do my best to do that, and it'll be testing my competence in this. You're right in framing the question that way, that there are a number of names, designations by which this part of the world, which presently is called ASEAN. We must remember that is the newest and the latest configuration and naming. And it appears from what I know of this, that this part of the world has been of interest to other parts of the world for persons living elsewhere. And it is not peculiar just to Southeast Asia, which is our interest now, but human beings are, in looking at themselves, are also looking elsewhere, at their immediate neighbors, at their neighbors far away, with all kinds of intentions, interests, ambitions. And many of these are manifest in how Southeast Asia has been claimed, possessed, owned, used, utilized. So, for example, Ptolemy, a cosmographer in Egypt, looking at this part of the world, at one time named it as the lands beyond the Ganges, the extra-Gangetic realm. So here's an example where one designates the world according to what one knows at the time. So India was known, the Ganges, the river systems in India were renowned. So anything outside that assumes credence in relation to what is known. So the Ganges is the known matter, and anything beyond that is just beyond that. In another instance, parts of this part of the world were referred to as the Golden Kersanese, which literally means the Golden Peninsula. And could it be referring to the Malay Peninsula as being the most prominent landmass coming out from a large landmass into the oceanic, the maritime areas? And you named that a little earlier on in talking about the Nusantara.
Indeed.
Suvarna Bhumi, meaning the realm of gold, coming out of various texts from India. Suvarna Dvipa is an alternate term, so to speak. Now there is the understanding that it specifically refers to Sumatra, but it may be Sumatra, but it's also Sumatra and beyond. And then Southeast Asia, which emerged just at the cusp of the Second World War as a designation requiring a kind of a militarized in a militarized sector of the world in the confrontation between Europe and the rest of the world, this time with Japan. And so the Southeast Asian Command was established in Southeast Asia as a theater of war. Nusantara. Before we get to Nusantara, did the Southeast Asians themselves have any interest in looking at themselves? Yes, because there was constant circulation of people, products, connections among those in the islands and those in the islands and the mainland. And among the terms that are known to be utilized is the lands below the wind, the domains below the wind. And then if there are lands below the winds, there are lands above the wind too. So here is a kind of differentiation between the maritime and the continental, so to speak. And the wind presumably refers to the monsoons, which formatively affect everything that goes on in Southeast Asia until today. And Nusantara is perhaps a more recent representation, although the antecedents for that can be traced to an oath taken by Gajah Mada in declaring that certain parts of all of Java, including certain sectors in Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, the aspiration was to unify them into a centralized kingdom.
And Gajah Mada, who was he?
Majapahit.
Majapahit.
Yes.
Part of a leader of the Majapahit Empire.
Yes, he's the minister, I think the chief minister of the ruler, and he swore this oath to undertake that he would not cease his life or his activity until this was okay. Those are dramatic manifestations of suzerainty, territorial kind of unification. And interestingly, Indonesia is setting out to currently build its new capital in the island of Borneo and significantly naming it Nusantara. I haven't really looked into this in great detail, but one might keep that in mind as a kind of a dangling provocation and make some sense of it subsequently. And I think all these kinds of historical precedents that we are talking about do have some bearing on what is going on presently. Okay. How the varying parties are approaching it is a matter to be looked at, I think, looked at carefully. So I've been rambling on this, but the main thing is to say that this part of the world has been of interest to others in other parts of the world. And naming it is a way of claiming knowledge, claiming contact, claiming familiarity, and claiming some kind of, I would say, connection and even ownership of it. Perhaps these terms may not have the same currency as we bring to them today, but we'll use them anyway as a means of nudging our way into understanding how it might have been utilized at that time. Many of them are aspirational, many of them are imagined, but there is a streak of reality in all of them, in the sense that they express various desires of wanting to connect, wanting to know, wanting to be there, and wanting to be part of the making of the region. So the region has been, I think, has always had a vital history and a vital connection with various parts of the world. It has never been not noticed, it has never been not known. And how we know it today is both a continuing and a different version of what has happened before.
TK, such a poignant note to wrap up our episode on the Nusantara. And thanks also for sharing your knowledge and insights, for it has truly enriched our conversation today. And so very grateful, TK, for the valuable perspectives you shared with our listeners here.
I wish you the best in your series. No?
Thank you. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to this episode of Norse Nusantara. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and subscribe to this podcast to hear more from leading thinkers and creators on picturing the Nusantara.